Friends, over the past 7 years, I have not been shy in sharing, well, for lack of a better term, my addiction to a certain sports car built in the exotic locale of Hethel, England. But to my defense, there is a cerebral approach to this. They're fast, light, and agile. But if I'm being honest, there's another British car that I have a similar addiction to, but not quite as explainable. It's certainly fast, but light and agile, I don't think I would use those terms. But for 2017, Bentley has significantly updated the Mulsanne, so why don't you and I drive my second guilty English pleasure in that very British place, Southern Bavaria. So as we get started here, I have good news and I have bad news. Let's start with the bad news. The bad news is we've been to Europe now 3 times in the past month, and 2 of those 3 times the sky has opened like it is now. But that does not stop us, especially when we have something special like this, which is the 6.75 liter, or as Bentley calls it, the 6 3/4 liter twin turbo V8. This one was kindly manufactured by Steve Brown. And basically what this is was a totally new engine last year, but this engine has its heritage way back into like the 50s. And what they did last year is they changed like the piston rings, connecting rods, a whole bunch of other stuff to update the engine to make the Speed model, which this is. But let's step back a bit, because there is a regular Mulsanne, if you could call a Mulsanne regular, and that has only 505 horsepower and only 752, let me repeat that, 752 pound-feet of torque, which comes in at a very low engine speed, 1750 RPM. But let's put that one aside and let's go to this one, the Speed. That goes up to 530 horsepower, but more importantly, 811 pound-feet of torque, which comes in also at 1750 RPM. So I think we should stop talking and we should do something with 811 pound-feet of torque, because I like saying 811 pound-feet of torque. Wait a minute, did I get that number right? 811 pounds of pulling power. Is that a typo? Actually, I think not. Which brings up the question, do we even need to go through whether this thing is quick or not? Probably not. So, it falls under the heading of, when in Rome, do as the Romans. But we're not in Italy. We're in Deutschland, and we are on the Autobahn. So, let's just skip comfort, let's skip Bentley, go right to sport, put our foot into this thing, and just hold on for dear life. Santa Maria Madre di Dios, or should I say, oh mein Gott, 200, 220, let's go to 240. Bye-bye, Mr. BMW. 240 flat out, no one in front of us. 250, 260, Santa Maria Madre di Dios, Deutschland, ich liebe dich, even in a British car. Yep, still raining. So what's the old saying? Stiff upper lip, even as it relates to driving dynamics. So there are a number of changes going on underneath the car that you cannot see. They mainly relate to the suspension and how the subframes connect to the car. So let's unpack this a bit, and you probably should get out a notebook because there's a lot going on. Number one, the air ride suspension. It has been modified. The dampers are different. The control of the dampers are different. Now keep in mind, there is the Speed and there is a regular model. In the Speed, the tuning is different, obviously to make this car more sporting, where the regular car is tuned, well, as a regular car, if you could call a Mulsanne a regular car. But then let's push on to those bushings, because that's really the most important part here. The connections of the subframe to the car, all of that is significantly bigger. So the connections here, and that is tied in with an active engine mount system. But wait, there's more. The brakes themselves have been changed. The rotors are now carbon ceramic, both in the front as well as the rear. Something we usually see on sports cars in this arena, but this, if I'm honest, a first for a sedan like this. Now, I spent a lot of time talking to Rolf, who is the board director for the engineering for Bentley. The man also was 28 years at Porsche, so he knows a thing or two about engineering. Anyway, all of this combined is focused to reduce the sound level in the car by 15 decibels. Now, when you and I talk about driving dynamics, it usually has something to do with corners and not decibels. So with that, let's take minus 15 out to the road. So that is quite the laundry list of changes, but really to unpack how that affects driving dynamics, especially as the sky is about to open here in Oostenrijk, we need to not only scream around corners and change the damper settings, we need to change the car. Because if I'm reading the tea leaves correctly here, all of those changes, especially like the damper changes, the bushings, and that active engine mount, it's all a function to make the car more compliant. And can I just say, Oostenrijk is beautiful. I mean, a wood-covered bridge. Okay, back to the car. So yeah, we're in comfort mode here. And really, if you remember, what, 3 years ago when we drove the Mulsanne the first time in Malibu, that car didn't embarrass itself in a place it really shouldn't be driving around. So let's try this in Oostenrijk. Please don't try this at home, especially in this kind of weather. And what you notice is you do get some lean, but very composed lean, even in the comfort mode. And that's because you have these huge, massive air ride dampers that are actively changing where the weight goes. Like if you remember when we talk about, God knows how many episodes, about how driving an old Super, you got to decide where to put the weight. Well, it's the air ride that's deciding where the weight goes in this case, not you. Okay, let's put that aside, move up to the Bentley mode. Now the Bentley mode makes things a bit more composed. You get, it's not a lot less lean, but definitely less lean. And especially when you pick up speed, it's hard to disturb the plane of motion in the car in this mode as opposed to the comfort mode. Now, as I often say, we're not here for comfort or even Bentley mode, we're here for sport mode. So let's switch to sport. And there's a nice little bridge coming up again. Oostenrijk, stunning place, sehr schön. So just as an aside, this sport mode is different than the sport mode that's in the Speed. The spring rates are different. Basically, it's the tuning from the engineers between the regular Mulsanne and the Speed that changes where the weight goes and how firm the car rides. So with that, let's go around a turn here. Don't try this at home. And much more composed. Like, there's definitely lean, but there's less lean in the rear when you're in sport mode. But we need to put this aside because we got to focus on the reason for the change, not the change itself. Because at the end of the day, the Mulsanne that goes around corners, that's the Speed. But the logic, after now driving both the Speed and this now Premier model, with all those changes in the bushings, especially the active engine mounts, and even the details to the tuning of the dampers, what they've done is make the whole car more relaxed. In other words, the Mulsanne doesn't have to do one specific job. There's the Speed for the people like you and I, and then there's this one for the people that want something not more compliant, something softer, something more, I guess, more pageantry as you go around corners. Get it?
Now, up until this point, you and I have been focusing on the important stuff like speed and driving dynamics, which over the years have very much become Bentley traits. However, we would be remiss if we didn't focus on the details. And I don't mean just picnic tables. I mean things like the lights. Notice they're different. They're LED, and if you ask me, they're rather flash. And it's details like this that have also become Bentley traits over the years. So now we need to switch our focus to details that have been changed, but maybe are not as readily apparent.
So if you guys watched our C63S AMG convertible episode from Trieste, Italy, and Slovenia, you know we weren't too lucky on the weather. Well, that luck seems to be following us here in Oostenrijk. So let's focus on the interior, shall we? So this looks very familiar, but actually there are a lot of changes. Biggest are the seats. They are completely new, actually. The frames are the same, but what they've done is change the foam, which changes the shape, which changes the support. Now, that beautiful Speed that we were driving when we first started that episode, the quilting was changed on that. Now, I am a sucker for diamond quilting, especially on Bentleys, but what they've done is they've changed the orientation of it, and then they've made the quilting, the diamond quilts, tighter, and it looks mean. Then they've changed. Now, this was actually changed last year when they introduced the Speed. On these organ stop pulls for the vents, they put the knurling behind the organ stop poles in the Speed. Well, that continues in the Speed now, but here on the Premier Signature, this is smooth back here. And just as an aside, the knurling on the Speed, it's on the inside of the inside door handles and on the outside door handles. Very cool little trick. Now, as we go under another little bridge here, notice this screen. It's a little bit bigger, but the biggest thing you notice is there is no door anymore. And that's because it is touch sensitive. You can do the pinch to zoom here. They've changed all the infotainment, so you've got Google Maps, you've got a completely different screen and a completely different UX in both environments here. But more importantly, to accommodate that, if you remember in the original, the 09 Mulsanne, the screen kind of hid away and you had the beautiful wood dash. They don't have that sadly here anymore. I actually spent some time talking with Brett, great guy, and he runs interior design for Bentley. And they actually wanted to keep the wooden door, but that means the screen would have to fold away. But invariably, when you start doing touch sensitive, then it gets a little wonky when you start putting too much pressure here on a piece that moves that wouldn't really handle well over time. So they took the decision to make this fixed. The screen's a bit bigger, and it's about 25 mils closer to you. So very interesting little touch here. Then last, but certainly not least, the wood. Now, I will be very honest, the Speed is the one I would have. But between the two we have driven today, the wood finish here, this is called liquid amber. Notice it's a different finish of wood. Instead of it being burl walnut, you've got this horizontal kind of finish, which really I have to say is stunning. It's like the old school Zambrano finish you would see in Mercedes way back in the day. Well, I was talking with Brett again, and he was completely geeking out over the different finishes here. Yes, you can get carbon fiber inset into the wood, but put aside carbon fiber, there is a whole new frontier in finishes in Bentleys. You can have a stone inset in your wood. So literally, you've got Google Maps, like Google Earth in your car. So it's like you got 21st century in your Bentley, but you can have old world craftsmanship of not just wood, but stone. If that is not cool, I don't know what is. And that is all. So in summary, what do we got? Well, if you can't beat them, you know the rest. But when it comes to Bentleys, a significant amount of changes here. This isn't an entirely new car. It is what they call a mid-cycle refresh, but one that doesn't refresh one car. It actually creates two cars. And follow my logic on this for a minute. When the Mulsanne came out in 2009, it kind of was like a totally new Bentley. Actually, a totally new old school kind of Bentley, because it was the Bentley built like they've built Bentleys since like 1933 in Crewe, England. But it was a modern kind of Bentley, even by design, all that kind of stuff. But here's the thing, when we drove it a couple of years ago, it actually went around corners, which I was surprised about. But now, in changing the bits and kind of further separating a Speed from the regular base Premier Signature model, they have created two different personalities or flavors of Bentley Mulsanne. One for car geeks like us, and one for people who want a more relaxed, I would say, more understated car. And that's effectively what the Mulsanne Signature Premier base is, but this one is actually just a little bit stronger for the folks like us. So with that, I want to turn this around to you guys and leave you guys with a question. And the question really is very straightforward and only focused on the Bentley. If you were given a choice between the Premier Signature base Mulsanne or the Speed Mulsanne, which would you choose? But you know what I'm going to say here, don't just tell me which one, but tell me why you would choose it, and you know what you would actually use it for. So let me know in the comments below or via our social media, MotoManTV all one word, MotoManTV all one word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And with that, I want to leave you with two things. Number one, make sure you download our fancy new mobile application, which you could download for free from Apple iTunes or Google Play, which I did in the back of this car. So it's on that tablet or this Android tablet in the back of this very car here. And number two, I want to leave you with a fun fact. So Bentleys, I have a soft spot in my heart for them, especially the Mulsanne, as we've discussed in many episodes. But how many pieces of leather go into making one of these cars? The answer is 450. But here's the catch. It takes over 150 hours to sew all of that cowhide together. Now, if you're not old world kind of craftsman like me, all of the bits that are connected, all of the infotainment and the electrics, that is connected with over 2.5 miles of wire. Until I see you next time, bis später.